Liftoff! There we go. Get this show on the road. Okay. That is rolling. First, I'll... Wow. I can wait. All right. Stream is queued up and live. And we'll take a moment to go ahead and flub that out there. Share this out. Copy the URL. Whoop. And what we got here? Live streams. Okay. Well, that works. Yeah, that'll work. We'll go with this. And we'll pump it out there too. All right. Share it out the post. So let's share it around. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Truberty, name right there, also known as Byron Osidious. That's the name I use for every channel that I use, every service that I log into, that I create a user account for. 90% of the time, you will find that I am labeled on there as Byron Osidious. It's just what I go with. It is the name of the primary protagonist from the first fantasy novel I ever got commercially published, Byron of Sidious, of the Cult of Sidious. What's on deck for today? Hey, Grayson. Good to have you here, dear. Good to see you. What's on deck for today? I'd like to chit-chat a little bit about my second favorite genre, and it's very, very much a close neck-and-neck tie. There are two genres that I primarily and predominantly engage in as a storyteller. And there's three that I engage in as a reader. They are fantasy, sci-fi, and horror. But as a storyteller, I am predominantly a fantasy storyteller and a horror storyteller. Horror doesn't get a lot of love, particularly not amongst the broader public, what I guess most folks online these days would dub normies. To be frank, to be honest about it, I'm something of a normie myself. If it were to boil down to brass tacks, I'm a father. I've got 4 kiddos at home between myself and my wife. I'm a husband. I work a regular day job in the afternoon and evenings. I'm just a janitor at a casino. I pay my taxes. I drive a minivan. Well, not even a minivan. It's a decent-sized van. It's a town and country. My kids are my two oldest kids. Well, two oldest kids in the home started soccer last week, so I drive a soccer mom van. I'm a soccer dad now. For the most part, I'm just your average everyday person under most metrics that you would use to classify somebody a normie or not. I'm not a heavy gamer these days. I mostly focus on playing retro games, the kind of games from the eras when I grew up, playing, Atari and Nintendo and Super Nintendo, the Mega Drive, the PlayStation 1, PS2. I kind of lapsed off and fell off during the era of the PS3 and PS4 and the Xbox 360 I had and played a little bit. I've got an Xbox One sitting upstairs that I hardly ever play. Mostly my kids play it. I don't spend a great deal of time on video games. So I don't think I would classify, at least in the online pop culture conversations that dominate YouTube and Rumble, as a gamer. I don't stream myself playing video games. uh, Well, not regularly. I have twice, 2 or 3 times, showcased myself playing a video game with one of my little retro devices hooked up to the TV downstairs in the playroom. But that's not what I focus on. I don't talk a lot about the video game industry or the space they're in. I'm not well known for being a big movie buff or television buff or critic. I focus on bookish things, by and large. But even with that designation, outside of being a storyteller and being deeply steeped in the genres of fantasy and horror and a little bit of sci-fi, I would technically be a normie. But I deeply enjoy tales of the unpleasant and the paranormal and the supernatural. Those things that go bump in the night, as could be evidenced by my Amelia City Stories series. Horror is a wonderful genre to dip into for several reasons. Cinematically, horror gets kind of passed over as cheap thrills. It gets shunted aside and not taken very seriously because a lot of schlock shock horror films, slasher films especially, rely on copious amounts of gore and sex. Because let's face it, sex sells. But they rely heavily on titillation, scandal, and kind of gross out gut reactions from their audience. But a lot of people, I think, overlook the benefits of horror. Horror as a genre, mythologically speaking, has, for time out of mind, existed with us in our myths and legendarium throughout history. Most of the stories that you think of, if I were to bring up the gods and monsters of Greek mythology, you typically think of things like the Kraken, you think of the Hydra, you think of manticores, you think of chimeras, Medusa, Jason and the Argonauts, the skeletal warriors in that old Harryhausen film. Throughout history, every culture has utilized dark stories, creepy campfire tales to spook us, to spook our young people, to try and give them a sense of dread and terror about the outside world, about the wilderness, about not being prepared. Oof, that's not pleasant, Sarge. Sorry to hear that, brother. But you're here now, and I appreciate you stopping in. So we've always had these campfire tales, these stories to share on a dark and stormy night. It's a classic setup for a lot of those kinds of stories. Um, the ones that start off with "It was a dark and stormy night." There used to be an old trope in television and cartoons hold on a second here. Is this going to work? Where somebody would take a flashlight and shove it right on. It was a dark and stormy night, much like this one. You know, they would do that in order to kind of set the stage and the atmosphere of the story being told. We've been doing this forever as human beings, as different societies and cultures. There's always been those dark and stormy night stories. Why? What is it about the sense of suspense and dread that we enjoy enveloping one another in? Sarge, we still had power at our house, overpriced solar for when the zombies come. Yeah, we're going to need solar when the undead rise up, and we don't have people working the hydroelectric plants. And yes, power outages, perfect setting for telling a scary story. There's a dual purpose to this universally. That doesn't matter what time period you're living in, doesn't matter what culture or customs you adhere to. There's two primary reasons as human beings why we enjoy engaging each other in spooky stories. For one, cautionary tales. The parents or elders of the family or tribe have always relied on being able to utilize narratives to scare the young in their family or in their tribe against behaving in certain ways or doing things that would be seen as detrimental to themselves, to the family, or to the tribe. If you think about a classic story that's told or was told throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, the story of Hook Hand. The general framework goes that there's a couple of teenagers, young adults. They go up and park the car either at a drive-in theater or at quote like make out point, some well-known local young adult / teenage hookup spot. And the story goes that this young couple were getting ready to sow their wild oats, and the girl hears a faint metallic scratching on the exterior of the car, and she tries to raise the alarm, but the boyfriend is too much in his prime and ready to go. And he says, "Oh, don't worry about it, baby. It's just the wind, or it's branches scratching on the car." And before you know it, Hook Hand scraping that metal hook instead of a hand along the car door, the car doors, until he finally rises up and the boyfriend looks up and there's this spooky drab stranger in a dark coat with a long brimmed traveler's hat that he can't make out his facial features except for some glowing red or yellow eyes, depending on which version of the story you're telling. And Hook Hand uses the metal hook hand to bash out the driver's side window. And he reaches in and slashes the boyfriend's throat or pierces it through his neck and yanks him out of the car and kills him, leaving the young woman to scream and panic and either stupidly jump out of the car and try to run away for dear life, or slide over to the driver's seat and back the hell out of there and book it for safety. This is a classic story of a cautionary sort. Depending on your framework, if it's a film or a television show that's kind of mocking or parodizing that old story, they may have the radio going and there's a news report breaks in the middle of their makeout session, talking, some local news radio personality talking about, "Oh, be on the lookout. There's a madman who recently escaped from the local sanitarium." For starters, why is your sanitarium so close to fucking town? that's question number one. Always, the sanitarium or the insane asylum was right on the outskirts of town. Put that shit a few extra miles away. Even Ravenwood Manor, which is an insane asylum attached tangentially to Amelia City, it's located halfway between Amelia City and the suburb of North Perry, but it's out of the way. It's tucked about 25 miles away from any major populated area. Now, true, it's surrounded by woodland, and I kind of relied on the old trope of plant that place in the middle of seemingly nowhere, in the middle of the woods, but it's dense woodland, and everyone knows psychos love traipsing through the woodlands because nobody can stop them or find them or prevent them from getting to the teenagers on makeout point to gut them. The point being, this is a standard classic cautionary tale. What is the intention behind it? Classically or traditionally, historically, the purpose of that story is to try and warn hormonally challenged teenagers against going to lookout point or makeout point away from all the supervisory eyeballs and ears of the adults in the neighborhood and the community to go do whatever it is they're going to do. It was an attempt at a prescription against engaging in uh, premarital sex and premarital relations. Good to see, Sarge, that you got your connection back. Good to hear. So that is a horror story as cautionary tale. Hansel and Gretel. Yes, I know. It's just an Aesop's fable. It's a fairy tale. But it's kind of grim. In the original version of Hansel and Gretel, at least, the original German version, told in the 14th and 15th century, and that was ultimately collected up amongst many other various legendarium and mythologies by the Brothers Grimm, who were not storytellers themselves. Let's clarify something. They were archivists. They were archivists and mythologists. They didn't write these stories themselves. They collected these stories, coalesced them together, and came out with an average. Yes, Raisin hits the nail on the head. The old fairy tales were brutal. Hansel and Gretel, in the original Germanic version of the story, they were killed and cooked and eaten by the woodland witch. Mrs. Sarge was gnawing on her fingertips. There's no internet to play or PC solitaire. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sarge, for that. But what was the message, or what was the proscription? What was the cautionary element of Hansel and Gretel? Don't go out in the woods without letting people know where you're going or having a surefire way of finding your way back. Or else you may get stranded, lost, killed, and eaten. It's a cautionary tale wrapped up in a horrific packaging. The terror of the unknown is set out there, and the terror of the other, the outsider, in both of these classic examples, is utilized by the elders of the community or family or tribe to instill dread, to exercise caution amongst their young folk, to ensure their continued survival and living function. There's one of, aside from being cautionary. All right, not a problem, Raisin. So prescriptions against certain behaviors. That's one reason why horror stories, dark tales, twisted tales, have always been told and why they continue to exist. The other reason, the other primary, primal, basic reason horror stories have always been told is to give us a frame of reference for our own suffering. I'll explain what I mean by that when I get back. I have to hit the bathroom real quick. Back in a moment. Throw on some tunes before I just walk away. Been thinking about, I gotta Really should figure out better method for this. There we go. Back in a minute. Got a microphone and a big inside, shouting outrage. That's just fine from the sea is shining. Say what you please. These lands on fire, you still so free. Hey, it's so hot, why is it so free? Taking on me, that's the decree. You can run anywhere, do it to six. But hey, it's so awful, why is it so free? Drive through deserts, fly over plains, no border stops, no heavy chains. Back it up, chase that dream. Turns out it's simpler than it seems. Hey, it's so awful, why is it so free? Take it on me, that's the decree. You can run anywhere, do it to six. Hey, it's so awful, why is it so free? Drive through deserts, fly over plains, no border stops, no heavy chains. Back it up, chase that dream. Turns out it's simpler than it seems. Hey, it's so hot, why is it so free? Take it on me, that's the decree. You can run anywhere, do it to see. So hey, if it's so awful, why is it so free? Cause you know I'm not the big wigs town. Freedom to question every single town. But don't forget you got that voice. Criticize all you want, that's your choice. Work a job, start a band. Punch your ticket, take a stand. Roll the dice, aim so high. I thought about it, Sarge. Voice is so free.
It's so awful,
why is it so free? Take it or leave it, that's the decree. You can run anywhere, do it you see. So hey, it's so awful, why is it so free? It's so awful, why is it so free? Yeah. Was that music too loud? Did I put the phone too close to the tablet here? Yeah, I mean, like I said, Sarge, I thought about that once or twice, but nah, I don't want to do that. I'd rather just say, hey, gotta hit the bathroom, be right back, put on some kind of music or something. What I really need to do is figure out, I know there's a way to load up, or at least I thought there was a way to, oh yeah, there's like presentation mode. There's a way to like load up video clips or something to, in order to be able to play something in the background or put myself in the corner. That's kind of neat, Sarge. There is one benefit to nicotine, and part of the reason why I will probably not be able to quit smoking until my dying day. Nicotine apparently is helpful in maintaining certain mental pathways and neuroelectrical activity. It assists with folks who have certain mental health disorders. And so one of the disorders that it is helpful with is a condition that I myself live with. So not giving up the old darts. No, I'm using Rumble Studio. Because I don't know as there is an actual like streaming app that I could throw onto this this tablet. I am once again using the Kindle Fire 10 that I got yesterday. Continuing forward with that for now, while I focus on kind of defragging and clearing up and cleaning up my laptop. So yeah, For the time being, I am using Rumble Studio still. I know it's got its drawbacks, but I have found it to be very helpful as a quick and easy pick up and use it kind of streaming option. Um, but what I was mentioning before I went and took a piss break, cautionaries, or trying to instill better or beneficial behaviors in our young is one reason why horror stories have always continued to persist. The other reason is comparison for our own suffering. Let me give you an example. Let's take the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Freddy Krueger, the nighttime sleep demon. When you are watching those films, absolutely horrific things, terrifying things are being committed upon, again, young people. It's kind of a running theme in the genre, particularly in film, is that most of the victims tend to be young men and women, teenagers or young adults. There's a tropish reason for that, and I'll get into that shortly. But these horrific things are happening to these folks. It's happening to them on screen, in the story, not to us, the audience. When you deign to watch something like The Human Centipede, which is disgusting, I will admit, I watched all three. Okay? They are various shades of gross. And after watching them, or after listening to those horror stories, those spooky ghost stories, there is a general sigh of relief from the audience. And it may not be pleasant to admit this. Those of us who try to be ethical don't like to admit it, but we have to, because it is the truth. Because there's a little thought that spurs into everybody's head after you're done watching a horror movie, or when you're done playing a horror video game, or when you're done reading a horror book. At least it's not me. At least it didn't happen to me. The stories that tend to shock us or shake us deepest are the ones where the victims or the protagonists in the story are easily identifiable with us as members of the audience. It's part of the reason why horror stories, like horror movies, don't affect people who are in the older demographic quite as fiercely as they do the younger demographic audience. Because we're no longer in that sort of target bracket, that window of who's going to get hit. Dear Sarge says, pyrazines are addictive chemicals added to cigarettes. We're told repeatedly that nicotine is the culprit. Well, my wife and I roll our own tobacco, or we roll our own cigarettes, and I will say I don't know what the difference would be for me personally because I'm a heavy smoker. But I imagine that if I actually bought packs of cigarettes instead of buying bags of tobacco and tubes to use the little hand crank machine, I'd probably smoke even more. Could be. Not great. But when you are watching a film like Alien, which is sci-fi horror, part of the sense of victory that we get as viewers of that film when Ridley is victorious over the alien is not only does it prove humanity's strength and ability, our chances of survival being shown or demonstrated as higher than expected, because we are team people, at least I am, like the Joe Rogan quote, I'm team people, bitch. Doesn't matter left, right, white, black. I don't care. Young, old. I don't give a fuck. Team people, go. We beat the xenomorph in every Predator film. Ultimately, humanity wins. In the long run, we're not, as the audience, the ones who are under the gun or under the knife. Somebody else is. When the protagonist, humans, when the average everyday normie proves victorious over the monster or the psycho slasher or the cult or whatever the antagonist entity or group, creatures or species is, or in the case of 28 days, 28 weeks later, the virus, there is a sense of joy and relief because we are being shown not only a terrifying set of circumstances that aren't happening to us, there's relief in the fact that it's not us that it's happening to, but there's that secondary relief, the joy of humanity can be victorious. We can overcome these creatures from the beyond or these psychopaths living and walking in our midst. We can prevail. This is something that was expertly demonstrated and showcased throughout the films of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the horror films of those eras. In Halloween, you have Michael Myers, who is this brute, giant killing machine, who is human. And yes, he is monstrous and he is ferocious. But at the end of the day, he loses. He is a menace, but he loses. Freddy Krueger, a once human being who sold his soul to dream demons. Although there are some theories that are being floated around out there, one in particular by a guy who I've recently become a fan of. Unfortunately, I don't know if he's on Rumble yet. I know he's on YouTube. His name is Zaffy, and he does a lot of horror analysis stuff. And he and several other dozens of people who have commented at least on his videos. So I imagine there's quite a bit of support for this hypothesis. There's a hypothesis out there that Freddy Krueger is a Cenobite, a la the Hellraiser films or novel that kicked everything off from Clive Barker. I like the hypothesis they float out there, and he's got a pretty cool video talking over why he suspects Freddy Krueger might actually be a Cenobite. But anyway, point being, in the Nightmare on Elm Street films, at the end of each film, Freddy loses. He is punted down the road to the next sequel until eventually, audiences get tired of that nonsense and they say, oh, we're not watching anymore. And then, studios don't greenlight the next Nightmare on Elm Street film, and that's a whole other different kind of horror show. Friday the 13th. Jason Voorhees starts off the film series. I mean, the very first one, he's not actually the killer. It's his mom. But then when Jason does show up, he is a hulking behemoth dreadnought menace, yes, but he's not technically undead, at least I don't think, until Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, when his body is struck through his grave marker with a bolt of lightning, and that brings him back from the grave, this undead juggernaut. It's not exactly 100% clear if he might have been an undead before that. They never really clarify. Although there were, again, 2 films, Friday the 13th films, in which he was not the killer. The very first one, and then Friday the 13th Part 4. He was not the killer. It was some maniacal fan of the story of Jason Voorhees. So, but again, at the end of each film, Jason loses. There is a rare exception with those two, specifically in Freddy versus Jason. They both lose. The point being, humanity survives. We manage to escape the worst fate. And as viewers of those films, readers of those books, we are not the victims of those circumstances. In Peter Straub's magnificent novel Ghost Story, which has such a simple name, but my God, I cannot recommend enough. If you've never read any Peter Straub, I normally might say start with Coco, but no. Start with Ghost Story by Peter Straub. It is a masterclass in building atmospheric dread in a small town with elements of paranormal or supernatural psychological tension and just dripping dread. The way the man structures his scenes is second to almost none. As far as overall storytelling technique, if I were to go across genres, I would put Straub neck and neck with Terry Pratchett, and I don't know which one of them I would say was the superior storyteller. I could not honestly give you an answer on that one because they were both just fucking brilliant. I can't stress that enough. But again, it comes down to this is an awful thing. It's fascinating. It's disturbing. But at the end of the day, it's not happening to me. Oh, yes, Sarge. Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th on its own got to part 8. Jason Goes to Manhattan. There was going to be a ninth film, Jason Goes to Hell, but the manuscript or the screenplay never got greenlit. The next thing that Jason Voorhees got greenlit for was a series of novels that followed up on the mythology. The first of which I read about half a year, maybe it was half a year ago, almost a year ago, was Friday the 13th, Church of the Divine Psychopath, which was a brilliantly written piece of tie-in fiction. It was great. And okay, Saw. That's. Do you want me to skip into talking about modern horror films and what I think the biggest differences are? Because gore, there is a subgenre of, like any other great genre, like fantasy and sci-fi. Horror also has its subgenres. One of the more controversial subgenres of horror is what is referred to as splatterpunk, also known as gorecore. The Human Centipede films would be considered gorecore, where the primary drive of the film or the story, Ramsey Campbell is a big proponent of splatterpunk written genre fiction. The subgenre of splatterpunk owes a lot of its existence to Ramsey Campbell and his novel Obsession. It primarily relies on disgust, because disgust is a form of fear. It elicits that knee-jerk, gut-wrench kind of gag reflex reaction. Body horror plays into gorecore quite a lot. If you look at the 1980s film The Fly, well, I think really a lot of the works of David Cronenberg relied on elements of body horror and gorecore, where the shock of damage being yielded upon the human body. That's what it relies on, is the shock factor, the disgust factor. That's gorecore, and that's what you see with a lot of films like Saw or the Hostel films. Even Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Rejects, or not House of a Thousand Corpses, or The Devil's Rejects, relies kind of heavily on gorecore and splatterpunk shock. And this is not, I don't want to dismiss it entirely, because that is touching upon human dread and human fear. But it's so jump scare heavy that you can quickly end up being numbed to it. There's not a great deal of narrative being conveyed in that sort of story. Now, to be fair, Ramsey Campbell, when his first few short story collections and Obsession, yes, relied on gorecore and on shock factor. But what made it work so well in his case, was that these moments of brutal violence were offset against otherwise mundane day-to-day existence and events. It's part of what made his scenes so horrific, is that here you've got a gal who's just on her way out of the grocery store after picking up her shopping, and some maniac comes blaring through the parking lot in his pickup truck because he's given up on life. All he wants is to see someone die by his hands. And the scene in which he rolls this woman over, he runs down this woman in his pickup truck. The way Campbell describes the sound of this woman's skull fracturing against the front fender of the truck, he's so in-depth and detailed about it. It's putrid. But that's reality. And that can happen. That's part of the absolute horror of it. He said it's an otherwise just regular day. Sarge says, first Halloween movie was revolutionary and original. I agree. Very much so. And Nightmare on Elm Street also was original, at least the first movie. So many of these got repetitious as they tried to recapture that inaugural story. Agreed. Sequelitis, I think we can, I hate to say it, much as I love horror, I blame the genre for making sequels such a thing. Now, yes, fantasy has been doing this longer even than horror. We look at, much as I love Tolkien, he kind of set the trend with Lord of the Rings. He was followed not long after by Stephen R. Donaldson with the novels of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, with a trilogy there. And you had Terry Brooks hopping in on the action with his original trilogy, the Shannara trilogy. The Sword of the Sword of Shannara, the Elfstones of Shannara, the Wish Song of Shannara. You had sequelitis. In books, it started with fantasy. In films, though, absolutely 100% guaranteed. Yes, I agree. Horror was the biggest proponent of doing that shit. Yeah, Rocky. But Rocky, I think the Rocky series only was able to get away with doing that because the horror genre had already set people up in the 70s, 80s, or the 70s and 80s. Effectively, that period, that 20-year period, from 1970 to 1989, that there were so many horror film series. Think of all the Pumpkinhead sequels, Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, Halloween sequels, Friday the 13th sequels, Child's Play sequels, Puppet Master sequels, or Demonic Toys sequels. There were so many examples of cheap schlock that you could just repeatedly do over and over and over again, and it would put asses in seats. The horror genre, much as I love it, is guilty in the cinematic realm of setting up the dominoes to get knocked over for us to be bombarded with sequels and reboots and restructures and reimaginings. Much as I fucking detest the Disney Corporation for doing the reimagining bullshit, they weren't the first ones to do it. Sadly, the horror genre has to bite the bullet and accept that they kind of caused that trend to become a trend. The expectation was set because of horror in large part. They weren't so it's not solely responsible, but it certainly made it easier to justify. Because there's another thing that people don't like to admit about horror as a genre, but it's absolutely true. And we saw it with the film adaptation of Five Nights at Freddy's. That movie made gangbusters money in profits based upon its budget. Horror is comparatively cheap to make compared to other genres of films. Let's take, for instance, the Blair Witch Project. That introduced the subgenre of found footage horror. Found footage found footage horror is a subgenre of horror that only works in the cinematic or television format or medium. Obviously, it doesn't work in the written form. Except for like if you're putting together a story that's cobbled together from various victims or people's journals and newspaper clippings, things like that, you can put something together like that, but it's much more prevalent in cinema. I haven't read any of the Shannara prequels, Sarge. I was told by several people to avoid the prequels, actually. That's why I never checked them out. What was it? Oh, yeah. Budget in film. The Blair Witch Project, the film, had an initial budget. It cost, I think it was somewhere around $72,000 or $73,000 to make and produce that film. They didn't do a ton of advertising or marketing for that movie before it was released. And it ended up making a couple $100 million, or no, it was close to $200 million in theaters during its initial run. Let's compare those numbers again. The movie cost just short of $70,000. And it made close to $200 million during its theatrical run. It cost them next to nothing compared to how much money it made. And that was just in theaters. This was during the time when DVD and Blu-ray sales on the back end could still get your film. If it didn't do commercially great in theaters, you could still try to hope for a cult following to purchase DVD or Blu-ray down the line to bump up the reputation of your movie. Yeah, I haven't rewatched it in a very long time, Sarge, but I do remember at the time being confused by the ending when I first saw it. I was like, did I miss something? I think I did at that time. I think I still missed something. The Paranormal Activity movies, another fine example. Cheaply made. The first Paranormal Activity film, if I remember correctly, the budget for the film was just under $300,000, and in its initial theatrical run, it brought in close to $100 million. You are bringing in over 100 times what it cost you to make these movies. So it's going to lend itself to a certain amount of, oh my God, we've got lightning in a bottle. Let's make another one. And so they churn out sequels that do increasingly worse with each subsequent entry into the series. But we don't see that just with low budget horror films. We also witnessed that happen with the Saw films, where the quality of the narrative degenerated quickly after the third movie. At least for my liking, it went like off a cliff. Same with the Hellraiser films too, but I actually liked Hellraiser 5 Inferno. I know I might get some shit from my fellow horror fans for saying this, but for my money, Hellraiser 1, great movie. Hellraiser 2, pretty good movie. 3 and 4 sucked balls. Inferno, the fifth Hellraiser movie, I thought was actually pretty well done and had a decent principal cast and central narrative concept and conceit. It's pretty good. And then with part 6, Deader, they just dropped the ball completely, and I didn't bother watching 7, 8, or Revelation on Netflix. Fuck all that. I know those movies exist, but I watched Hellraiser 6 and was like, oh my God, this was terrible. I give up. But yeah, part 5, Inferno, was actually pretty good. There was also a habit back in the late 90s of every horror series or franchise trying to take itself into space. You had Jason X with Jason in space. And the Hellraiser 4, I think it was set in space. Like, why? Why are you doing that? I would ask that more, but then you have shit like Event Horizon, which was a horror story in space that worked. Quoth doesn't need a ton of screen time. I'd rather not give him that opportunity. Amelia City, I don't think Amelia City could be done in live action. I'm going to do a quick sideline tangent. Sort of self-promotional. I shouldn't do that because I'm just talking about the horror genre, generally speaking, and I want to give praise to the genre. Horror stands on its own. It is fine. It needs champions, however, and I would personally champion horror as a genre of storytelling. And I've said this before, and I 100% mean this. If I were ever to have the opportunity to have any of my material adapted for film or short series, the material that I think would be best presented in a visual format would be a handful, not all, a handful of my Amelia City stories. But I don't know how. I don't think Quoth could be done in live action, not even with CGI. I would prefer that if it were to occur, that he be 100% animated. I would be on board with an animated adaptation of an Amelia City story or two, not live action. Oh, Sarge. I saw 2 episodes. And I noped the fuck out. Creative control is a big thing. And again, this is another sideline tangent, but You mentioned that with Brooks having sold the television adaptation rights of Shannara to MTV. This is a big problem that authors run into when they do get offered a deal for adaptation to screen or film. The more creative control you want to retain, the less money that studios or that production studios are going to offer you. When you look at someone like Stephen R. Donaldson, and I know I've brought him up many's the time because he is a personal narrative hero of mine. On several occasions, he was offered big money for the rights to adapt the Covenant novels for television miniseries. And in every case, his response to these various production companies was, I will do it, I will sell you the rights, but only if I maintain final authorization say on all elements that you are going to adapt. And they all told him, one and all, no. He said, I'll take less money. I'll take significantly less money. But I want control and final say over the production. And they told him, no. And he said, okay, then no deal. You don't get to mangle my story. While he is not championed as one of the premier storytellers in fantasy, that alone should give him some kind of esteem amongst fantasy fans, because he didn't sell his perspective. He didn't sell his control over the material. He told them all, I get final say or we don't have a deal. So he never got a deal. The closest anyone ever came, is my understanding, back in 2002, 2003, he almost had a deal with Sci-Fi Network. But they wanted to give Covenant a different disease, something other than leprosy. And Donaldson's response was, no, that is central to his personality and his worldview. They wanted to change the disease that Thomas Covenant had. And Donaldson said, no, that you can't do that. That informs the character's behavior. So, no deal. Oh, yeah. I mean, Amazon just... fucking hell. Fucking hell. They... you gotta be careful who you hand over the rights to your material to. Might be best left to just end up in public domain so that you can't blame your prodigy, your offspring, for fucking ruining it for the next generation. But I digress. Part of what, or the biggest sort of motivation for me to come on here today to talk about horror and to insist that it stands on its own, and to talk a little bit about why horror still stays with us and why it continues to be a relevant genre of narrative. There has been, amongst the sort of indie writing community, a lot of conversation recently, in the last, I'd say, 3 or 4 months. Many small press or indie authors have been talking about the observation that in modern film, in modern television, and in modern books, horror often does not stand on its own. It ends up getting mixed in with some other genre or other techniques in order to maintain its feasibility. The examples that most people cite for this are things like Dale and Tucker versus Evil on Netflix, which is a great movie. It's a combination of horror and humor, a horror comedy or comedic horror, depending on how you're looking at it. Kind of like Punch and Jilly. Is it a tragical is it a tragical comedy or a comedic tragedy? Who knows? Bonus points to anyone who catches that reference. So that's cited oftentimes as an example of horror being mixed with another genre. In the video game realm, Dead Space is the combination of sci-fi with horror, where the horror doesn't stand on its own because it's mixed into a science fiction environment and world building framework. Okay, I'll grant you that one as well. And it stands on its own as a great game series. Although with part 2 and part 3, they kind of removed a lot of the jump scare, horrific kind of tension and made it more action gamey as the series went on. 3 absolutely destroyed itself with microtransactions. Another one that people cite as an example, this one I actually just saw just this morning. I'm going to give myself a quick reminder. I'm sorry, I'm not exactly 100% on the ball, even though I should be on this one. Okay, Event Horizon. I actually mentioned that one earlier. Again, it's a dark science fiction movie, blending sci-fi and horror. Sarge, I'm going to highlight that. Sarge says, can we have a crippled, insane, transgender, non-white spree shooter as a villain to check all the woke boxes, or would that be too close to reality? I don't think we can put that film in cinemas because the kind of people who would go to see that film and cheer it on and cheer on the antagonist would be too busy jerking themselves off in the seats to allow it to run for more than a weekend. Anyway, and then I also think of the grimdark subgenre of fantasy, which is effectively just fantasy storytelling. It's kind of the merger of swords and sorcery with low-end sorcery and mixed in with horror storytelling technique and tropes and mechanics. It's wherein you're telling a high or mid-range fantasy swords and sorcery tale with a lot of unpleasantness. For a video game example, I would turn you to Dark Souls, or better yet, Bloodborne. Cosmic horror also ends up playing a hand in there. And we've seen cosmic horror and weird horror or weird fiction come more and more back into a position of relevance in the modern television and film cinescape. But horror as a genre has also always been quickly adaptable to talk about or be framed in stories that are relevant to the world around those stories. The cautionary tale I was talking about earlier about the hook hand at, slaughtering teenagers, hooking up at Makeout Peak. All right. Grimm was a pretty good one. I loved that show. The first 2 seasons are great. I cannot speak to seasons 3, 4, and 5, though. I got about halfway through season 3, and I gave up on it because the writing you could tell the writing deteriorated. And a large part of that was because the show was being made, season 3 was being made during the early 2000s writers' strike, back when Chuck and Heroes also ended up taking huge nosedives in quality because of the writers' strike. And when they came back from the strike, a lot of people didn't go back to the shows that they had been previously working on. But yeah, the first 2 seasons of Grimm were great. After that, it kind of falls off. For me, I didn't end up finishing the show. I got about halfway through season 3 and I wiped my hands and walked away, which is unfortunate. I would like to go back and eventually finish it to see if it recovered itself at all. The part of what makes horror stand the test of time is that no matter what the socio-political environment of the world, no matter what no matter what state the culture is in, broadly speaking, horror is predicated on fear. Fear is universal. Fear is eternal. Discomfort is forever. It is a facet of the human condition. Regardless of the framework of the world in which a horror story is set, we as people are always going to have something unpleasant happening around us. There's always going to be something that we can't quite explain, whether it be paranormal, supernatural, or just pure raw psychotic rage filling the minds of and compelling certain members of our populace to do unspeakably evil things to each other. Horror is timeless. It doesn't need a framework to happen. And that's part of the staying power of horror as a genre. No matter how good things are going, there's always the possibility that something fucked up could happen. And it could happen to you, dear viewer, or to you, dear reader. We don't know. It's a roll of the dice. That's part of what makes the genre eternal. Much like Jason Voorhees himself, constantly coming back and ripping apart teenagers who try to smoke pot or hook up at Camp Crystal Lake. Just stop going to the camp, for God's sakes, people. You should figure this out by now. Anyway. But that pretty much concludes my lengthy ramble about horror and why, as a genre, it still stands. As a side note, I would just like to observe that once again, per normal, I do not get consistent viewers on the YouTube side of these things. I have it open and available and running dual stream between Rumble and YouTube. But the majority of my viewers here always end up coming through from Rumble, and I appreciate that. I mean, to be honest, I'd appreciate my audience from wherever they decide to come from. But I'm just observing that it's almost always from Rumble. Sarge says, back in the 80s, my best friend in high school, I'm going to highlight this real quick, said he'd like to go on a killing spree and blame it on Lawrence Welk. The bubbles made me do it. In response to parents blaming bands for kids' suicide. Jesus. The parents blaming bands, blaming music. I remember This was. Are you referring to the whole Judas Priest thing? If you play the albums backwards, there's satanic messages. Just listen, listen. Put the needle on the record. Play it backwards. Satan is Lord. Satan is Lord. There was a great Bill Hicks bit about that, where he says, "Dude, if you're sitting in your basement running your records backwards on your needle, you're Satan. Look no further. You found him." Um, the bubbles made me do it. We've always sought after scapegoats, particularly in popular culture and entertainment medium, to try and pin the blame for these behaviors and incidences upon. There was the satanic panic around Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s and 80s as well. That carried throughout, thanks to the dipshittery of the moral majority crusade from Nancy Reagan and her ilk. Now, look, I am not some fringe nut who's going to say you need to allow anything and everything in the realm of art to be plastered everywhere. No, you need to allow it to exist, sure, but you don't have to promote it. There's no obligation from any audience to promote or to encourage certain material. I know for my part, with the Amelia City stories, I've had a couple people point out to me that I've got a couple of stories that are really not pleasant. They're not supposed to be. They're not going to have universal appeal. That's not the point. They're only going to be beneficial for people who enjoy horror material to indulge in. Do I want a broader, more curious audience? Sure, I would benefit from that. Of course, who wouldn't? I'd be lying if I sat here and said, nah, I'm fine with a teeny tiny audience all the time, perpetually and forever and ever. I would like a larger audience, but I understand that my material is not for everybody, and it might not be healthy to put it in front of everyone. Quoth doesn't need that big an audience to be effective. He does what he does, and he's good at it. Much like Wolverine. I'm the best at what I do, bub, but what I do isn't very nice. Although I like the slapstick 1990s comic book parody of his little scene there. I'm the best at what I do, bub, but what I do isn't very smart. It's like, good line. Slapstick was a decent side character from Marvel, but I don't think they ever. Well, no, they did bring him back, but I didn't read much of what they brought him back as. I think he was in the. Maybe it was the New Warriors. I don't remember. I do know they brought Slapstick back though on one of the teams. Sarge, I like that. You want a happy ending? Go to a massage parlor. This is art, bitch. Yeah, yes. That's actually one of the. I don't get a ton of feedback on most of my material. I just don't, to be honest about it. But over the years, the most common piece of feedback I have gotten from my Amelia City stories is the question, does anybody survive? A few people have, yes. But that's kind of not the point. In Amelia City, 90 to 95% of your people everyday, average, ordinary human beings who run afoul of the things that call the shadows in Amelia City home, they're not going to survive. And if they do live, they're not going to be mentally intact afterwards. They will be broken. Quoth will make certain of that. He's got help from folks like Roderick, he of the blade, Merrick, he of the chains, Sasha, she of the ink, Jago, he of the flames, Trask, he of the frost, the strangers who serve, quoth, as well as the wraiths and the spectres that reside in and around the realm known as Amelia City. They're not there for humanity's benefit, but they're not there for their utter destruction either. They're there out of curiosity. Oh yeah, because Amelia City is set in Amelia County. There's the main metro itself of Amelia City, and then there's North Perry, there's West Perry, or sorry, there's North Perry, East Perry, and then there's Candleton. So you've got 3 suburbs that are around the city of Amelia. I don't have anything permanently set to the west except for Edgerrin. And I've only had one story take place in Edgerrin thus far. Because, yeah, even I understand if you have all of this nasty business happening in one little town, eventually people are going to figure out we can't fucking live here anymore. We got to move. But when you've got an entire county where, yeah, a lot of bad shit seems to happen, but nothing's confirmed. There's nothing solid. A lot of it's urban legends. People go missing. There's a lot of ghost stories. What town doesn't have a ghost story or two? Amelia County's just got a lot of them. That's all. Don't worry about it. What was that noise? You don't want to look and see, because you might find a floating human skull with bits and scraps of flesh still attached to its surface, one drooping eyeball, and a scorpion stinger attached to the bottom of a spinal column, and little leathery bat wings flapping on either side of its head where ears should be, saying, "Hey, how you doing, buddy? My name's Poxy. You got a smoke?" Because he's buddies with Quoth too. So is Eugene, the Technicolor cow, but we'll get around to him eventually. Anyhow, that's going to pretty much wrap it up for me. I'm going to hit the bathroom one more time and then open the floor to final questions. Wait. At least killing off those cholo dudes meant no one would miss them. Okay, yeah, you're referring to the short story wherein the gangbangers found themselves having to deal with the denizens of Amelia. Yeah, I had fun writing that story. I have fun writing a lot of the Amelia City stories. There's only been a couple where even I was uncomfortable writing the stories. Um, One of them is a tale from the Justice of Amelia collection called Course Correction, which centers around a dog fighting ring and what happens to a couple of the gentlemen who are involved in that particularly inhumane practice. And there's a story in the Justice of Amelia called Brutal but Just. It is the longest of the Justice of Amelia stories. And there are characters who are victims who it is almost impossible to be sympathetic toward. There's a particularly unsavory group of human beings who find themselves under the very unhappy eye of Roderick, he of the blade, the stranger named Roderick. And these particular ne'er-do-well humans, they are turned into so much meat, and it is the unfortunate duty of one particular Amelia City homicide detective to find out what's happening to these people, who's killing them, and what they all have in common. And when he finds out or figures out what these victims all have in common, he has a kind of crisis of conscience. Does he really want to get human criminal justice for this group of victims who have themselves been victimizing the most helpless amongst humanity? That was an uncomfortable story for me to write, in large part because I found myself wondering the same thing. If I were in this detective's shoes, would I even bother? Or would I let this happen? Would I let it continue? Because it is a necessary cleansing. My own perspective on the matter comes through relatively clear in the story. And I've been juggling the idea of possibly sharing that story on stream or Course Correction. I'm not sure which one just yet. But I think one of those stories would make for a decent Storyteller's Corner presentation. But anywho, any last questions, comments, or concerns from anybody in the audience? I would say give voice to it now. I'm going to grab one last smoke before I call it a show. Let's not do dead air. Let's at least have some kind of music in the background here. A smell? Oh, this. Ah. Gotcha. Callous bones, that's your stage. Day by day, we set the wage. You write rules and fancy ties, but don't forget what is fun you ride. What happens when we doubt our tools? When we step away from being fools. You need us more than we need you. Don't forget it or you'll learn it's true. Used to find whiteheads in the clouds, but down here we're tough and proud. Your papers mean nothing when shelves are bare. With folks like us, just stop to care. The salts of earth can't be replaced without us. You're a house to race. Keep it going, watch what we do. You'll miss the hands holding up your view. What happens when we down our tools? When we step away from feeding fools? You need us more than we need you. Don't forget it or you'll learn it's true. Here's the thing, sorry. I'm pretty sure your version of Dumbo Drop has as many butts and seats as that movie. Haha! What happens when we doubt our tools, when we step away from feeding fools? You need us more than we need you. Don't forget it or you'll learn it's true. What happens when we doubt our tools, when we step away from feeding fools? You need us more than we need you. Don't forget it or you'll learn it's true. Punish your toilet. Need some variety in your diet there, Sarge, if you're punishing the porcelain. You need a higher fiber diet, sir. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for me then. Gentlemen and ladies, if there were a couple of you here outside of Raisin, I'd like to thank you for stopping in. Understand that you have a variety of choices of where to go on Rumble and or YouTube to spend your watching or listening time, and I appreciate each and every one of you who decides to take a few minutes here or there, or the entirety of the stream, or even just portions, and opt to spend that time listening to this particular wonky southern Minnesota storyteller. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, Keep reading.